Hello and welcome to Now More Questions, the interview series that gets conversations started. So far, it's been a bumpy ride to establish a new regulatory framework for pesticides in the European Union. The European Commission initially held back its proposal, but finally came forward on the 22nd of June 2022. The proposal is now making its way through the twists and turns of European decision-making, with the two legislative bodies, the European Parliament and the Council of the European Union, representing the member states, both expected to endorse their positions on the Commission's proposal. And needless to say, it looks like it will be a heated debate, as some member states have voiced concerns that the European Commission is taking an overly heavy-handed approach. First, it sets a binding EU-wide target to reduce the use of chemical pesticides by 50% by 2030. And second, it's a regulation, which raises questions as to how such a target will be implemented on national level. But beyond the institutional aspects of this debate lies an industry and a product which is in the spotlight: pesticides. So what will it take to reduce the use of pesticides, and how does an industry producing pesticides deal with such an objective? To discuss this, I am joined by Olivier de Matos, Director General of CropLife Europe. Olivier, welcome to the show and thanks for taking the time to be with us.
Well, thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure.
So, Olivier, can we just start by asking you to give us a couple of words as to what CropLife Europe represents?
So CropLife Europe represents crop protection solutions that are innovative and science-based. We gather 22 companies that include big companies, but also SMEs. And we also gather 32 national associations. So the idea of our work is to basically focus on four main areas. The first one is conventional pesticides. The second one is biopesticides. The third one is plant biotechnology. And the fourth one is digital and precision ag. The idea is basically to promote a toolbox for farmers and to help farmers growing their crops and protect them.
Perfect, thank you. So we'll have a lot to discuss, given that the topic of this talk is on pesticides. But before we go any further, it's our tradition in Now More Questions to hand over the first question to our previous guest. That was Dr. Piers Robinson, co-director of the Organisation for Propaganda Studies, and he was interviewed on the topic of media freedom.
Okay, well, we live in a world which is where propaganda is ubiquitous, and so my question would be in the issue of pesticides, whether they should or shouldn't be used and regulated. In your view, where is the propaganda emanating from? Is there propaganda from both sides, i.e. distorted and misleading information being provided? Who's responsible for propagandizing the issue the most, in your opinion, would be my question.
That's a very interesting question. I think propaganda is actually something that we hear a lot now in the news when talking about war. So there is you have two sides and that are using propaganda actually to sort of, promote and saying they are best, they are better, they are winning, the others are losing, and so on. I wouldn't actually talk about propaganda for sort of this conversation. I would rather talk about exchange of information or, trying to demonstrate that we have the solutions. We have a common objective, that is the transformation of the sector, of the way we produce food. And it's about, so the objective is common. And it's about basically sort of discussing the solutions, discussing the options that we have to get there. So the what is clear for everyone. It's the how we're going to get there. So, and of course, we're going to have, among all stakeholders, people that will promote their solutions and all that will promote their solutions. And that's how it works. And then it's going to be up to the regulator, to the policymakers, to take a decision on actually sort of, on not what is the best solution, but what are the solutions that will help us getting to the common objective. And in that respect, CropLife Europe, by having sort of the toolbox of crop protection solutions, is part of that conversation that needs to happen. So I wouldn't go into propaganda. I would rather go into exchange of views, and in a respectful way, and also explaining sort of why our solutions are part of the solution.
But there is a very specific debate when it comes to pesticides as a solution. And in the public debate, there have in fact been two citizen initiatives, I believe, that the Commission is also responding to in putting forward its proposal. So there's and it doesn't often happen that there are citizen initiatives, and that was one of the tools to get Europe, closer to the citizen. And it's almost strange, why did they pick pesticides particularly? And probably it's also to do with how much pesticides does get attention in the media, for instance. Do you feel that pesticides are unfairly treated in the public debate, or maybe that their benefits are not sufficiently well understood?
So the short answer to your first question is yes. And the answer to the second question is, I think you're right. I think there is we have a responsibility as an industry, because I believe that we haven't been very good at communicating actually the benefits of pesticides, and this is something that we need to get better at. People and the public understand the benefits of a car, a plane, a mobile phone, because it's concrete for them. When it comes to pesticides, there is a gap between basically us and the public. In the middle, we have farmers, and they are the main users. And I think that in the past, we've been actually focusing on making sure that the direct users, the direct customers of the products could see the benefits of it, because they see the benefits of it. And there has been a gap between actually us and the rest of the public. So it's up to us to make sure that these benefits are well understood. We're talking about food security and food safety at the end of the day. And this is why pesticides are vital. I would like also to add something, is that, and it's probably not well understood either. I mean, the farmers use only a fraction of the total used decades ago. There is a drop in the use of pesticides, in the risk and use of pesticides. So, and this is a trend that is going to continue. There is a rule that we call the IPM rule, that is the Integrated Pest Management Rule. And pesticides basically are used as the last resource. So they are not the de facto use, they are the last resource. If farmers can avoid using pesticides, they will go for it. And that's okay. If they have to use it because they are sort of threatened, or their crop is threatened by a new disease, a new pest, then they will go for it. But it's always, implementing the IPM rule, it's always the last resource.
At the same time, you are representing an industry that is producing this last resource, let's say, and the European Commission is steadfast on its intention to seriously reduce the use of this last resource. Now, I'm sure the discussion on targets will go on, and some people will surely be more ambitious than reducing by half, and others might reduce a little bit less. But I'd like to hear your position on the actual premise that consists in saying we need to reduce the use of pesticides. Do you dispute that? Do you say that actually, well, on the contrary, we should probably even be thinking of using more pesticides, because maybe there's a risk that there will be more pests, more diseases arriving in the future? What is your position on that?
I think we need to look at it from a holistic approach. Basically, we're talking about the reduction of the risk and use of pesticides. So it's a question of managing these pesticides, right? As I said, the trend is going down. There is no dispute as long as other solutions are made available. So, if we get into, and this has to be part of the equation. That's why I'm talking about the holistic approach. And this is why I believe that, the solutions that we have to be looked at as a whole, and all kinds of options and ways basically to protect crops. If we remove some pesticides from the farmer's toolbox, we need to be able to propose tools that will help them actually compensate. And I'm talking about innovative tools. We are talking about things like digital and precision agriculture that will help farmers being more precise and more specific in the use of their pesticides, so use less. We're talking about biopesticides, we're talking about plant biotechnology, and that part, for example, that innovation part has to be promoted. So it's a question of, okay, remove, but then give. And look at it from a toolbox perspective, not like only on one side, one side of the toolbox, I would say. The other thing I would add here is that when we look at the SUR, there is something that is fundamental here, is that there is a need to promote that innovation. There is a need to foster innovation. And the feeling is that, this is slightly lacking in the approach that is being taken, or probably it's in the public domain that people do not really understand that, we are talking about sort of an overall perspective here. And another point is also the need to make sure that we do not go for a one-size-fits-all solution. You were talking about targets, about reduction targets, and so on. And the headlines were about sort of 50% reduction for everyone, and so on. I think we need to be actually be a bit more realistic and listen to every single member state. We had strong opposition from a big group of member states saying, well, we do not agree with this. Besides the fact that we need to have an impact assessment on the consequences of the SUR on food safety, there is also a need to adapt and to be flexible. Look at the situation in the south of Europe, which is not the same as in the north of Europe or as in Central Europe. So there is a need to just make sure that we have the right balance in the approach that is going to be taken. And that will require conversations.
And underlying that conversation is very likely this consideration that pesticides are a risk. And even though farmers may consider that it brings them a benefit because it allows for the crop to grow, there is a perception, probably a valid one in society, that pesticides represent a risk. They are, after all, chemicals, designed to be toxic for, pests that they intend to eliminate. So what is actually, according to you, the greatest risk for the environment and human health? Is it the chemical substances themselves that represent a risk? Is it the way these chemical substances are actually used in the field? So it would be more a question of stewardship of those products, or is it actually that there is also a risk in the residues of those products that can be found maybe in the food we consume? Because that's really a key thing we hear a lot of the time, is that we end up eating some of these chemical substances. So can you just clarify for us what is actually the risk?
I'll try to be short because you have a lot of questions here that are raising a lot of points. What I would like to say as a start is that pesticides are among the most or strictly regulated substances. The objective is to have high safety standards applied to these substances. So that's one of the first things. The process to approve a pesticide is a long one. Is based on science, a lot of studies that are being produced, and to determine actually, or to demonstrate that there is no unacceptable risk in the use of the chemical. So that is something that has to be stated again and again. It's a very strict approval process. That's the first thing. The second thing is that you're talking about the use itself. I would say that farmers are professionals and they know how to apply the product. They are trained. And that also makes a difference on the how you use a substance. That is a very important element for us, CropLife Europe. And actually, part of our 2030 commitments, we've committed to train 1 million farmers by 2030. And we got actually some results of the first survey, like year one, basically. And despite the pandemic, we were able to train 112,000 farmers so far. So that's good. There's a long way, but we will continue. We'll continue that. And the idea is really to have these trainings to basically share methods, best practices, and to make sure that we always, go better and better in the use of pesticides. The last point was about sort of the residues, if I remember correctly. Again, because the process is very strict and very stringent, the standards, the safety standards are very high. So basically, the calculation is done with what is called a safety margin, and the safety margin are very, 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 very high. So, and there is the EFSA publishes reports actually every year, if I'm not mistaken, showing all these limits, all these demonstrating actually that there is a high safety standard with the residues. So putting all this together, I think that again it's probably part of something that is not communicated enough. That should be more in the public domain, and that can actually sort of go with long conversations on explaining how it works. But this is something that has to be understood. The approval process is very strict, and that's part of the needs actually to make sure that safe substances arrive on the market.
And that actually is something I wanted to follow up on, this approval process, because when you see a proposal of the Commission that is very ambitious on a very specific type of product for which it already has an approval process in place, it's hard to understand how we got into this situation, because if the approval process was robust, in theory, the pesticides being placed on the market shouldn't be posing much of a problem. Therefore, we shouldn't need to necessarily face such a drastic reduction target as proposed by the Commission to halve the use of chemical pesticides by 2030. So does it not mean that the approval process is somehow not completely working?
Well, I think, the process is working. Again, the rules are very stringent, so it takes a long time. I think that it's a question of timing. We are getting into situations where to get the approval of a substance, it takes 11 years. Which shows actually that that there is like a thorough evaluation of the substance. At the same time, you get into a situation where you say, okay, so we have substances that are being approved. It takes a lot of time, and we are considering removing some substances from the market. At the end of the day, trying to answer your question in a concrete way, it's about making sure that we have solutions on the table. Per se, the reduction is happening. As I said, there is a reduction in the use of pesticides because it's the last resource in the entire process. So it's a question of saying, okay, we are imposing a reduction in the risk and use of pesticides. At the same time, we're giving you all the tools so that you can continue grow your crops in a safe and sustainable and also resilient way. So that's again, it's part of a bigger equation.
So do you see maybe that shift reflected in the business models of the companies that you're representing? I suppose that looking into the future, they may not be banking so much on pesticides, at least for what constitutes the European market, are they then looking at precisely developing other solutions that would be alternatives then to pesticides to continue providing these tools for the farmers?
So I would not say alternatives to pesticides. I would say solutions, sort of making the toolbox bigger, have more solutions available. And they have these solutions. When you talk about digital and precision agriculture, solutions are already there. When you talk about biological biopesticides, solutions are already there. When you talk about plant biotechnology or the new genome techniques, for example, we're expecting a proposal next year on this specific solution. So it's a question actually of speeding up, making sure that you have more solutions available, that innovation is promoted, and that the toolbox is as big, as complete as possible to help farmers. That is an element that is important, and companies are really ready. They're just ready. And if you look at other parts of the world, you will see actually some of the things that are being talked about here in Europe that are already being used in other continents. And it shows that actually that we need to speed up the process in Europe, in particular when we talk about innovation and innovation across the board.
And I'd like to zoom out for a second, because one of the issues around agricultural policy, whether it's agricultural inputs or production, is that you often have this feeling that there are two worlds that are confronting each other. On the one hand, you have those who will be saying, as you've mentioned, highlighting the importance of food security and increasing yields for farmers' livelihoods, that kind of trauma, agricultural productivity. And on the other hand, you have those who are saying, well, agriculture has a major responsibility when it comes to preserving the environment, biodiversity, and we need to really look at a completely different agricultural model that is much more caring of nature. And in the backlight of that, you would imagine something that would say, we need to have a pesticide-free world. So essentially a world where pesticides are no longer at all, chemical pesticides at least, I suppose. Do you think that it's realistic to think that these worlds will somehow coexist? Because it always seems like one almost naturally has to dominate the other, or it's unlikely to imagine that really we can have these two visions as complementary approaches, because they're so different. So I just, as you're working in this field of policy, day in, day out, I'm just curious to get your view on that.
So I think one does not reject the other, as far as I'm concerned. I was talking about the toolbox. We have a toolbox of solutions. A farmer will take one or two or three or the four, or none, and can go actually to another way of producing. I think these are complementary tools. These are complementary ways of growing crops. So the responsibility that we have is to make sure there is enough food that is produced at an affordable price, and also safe food that is produced, and food that is produced for everyone. So we have a dynamic here that is about producing for a growing population, and all methods are worth trying. The objective is the same. We need to have a transformation of the way we produce the food. The how can be a multiple hows. We are one of the hows, and others can actually decide to go in another how, and that's absolutely fine, as long as we are in a position to support farmers in the production and in the protection of their crops. I would add something about the pesticide-free, and actually you mentioned like the chemical pesticides, because organic, used a different kind, because they have to protect their crops. So one is synthetic, and the other one is, like, I would say, nature, but it's pesticide also. So you see, in these words, if you look at sort of, the meaning and the industry, you're going to have like the same word that is being used on two house, but probably one will be looked at with a more negative eye than the other.
I think that's an important clarification. Then maybe just a sense of your top line expectation as an industry highly involved in this discussion as to what is your expected outcome of all of this, or your most desired outcome, maybe better phrased.
So I would have actually three angles. One is the promotion of innovation, making sure that we have tools that are made available to farmers. Innovation is extremely important. Innovative tools are extremely important, so we should make sure that we make them available and quickly. The second thing is about the flexibility. We're talking about targets and so on. I think we need to avoid getting into the trap of one fits all. We need to make sure that every single country is able to basically answer to is able to have a response, and that is extremely important. Europe is beautiful with its diversity, and that diversity has to be taken into account. That's what makes the beauty, but also the challenge of Europe. And the third thing is also about the financial support. I think there is a need to financially support the sector to actually go for the transition. So we talk about the CAP, the EU policy on agriculture, and basically, with the funding, that can be an option. The thing is that this cap was already negotiated, adopted. The funding is there, so there may be a need to go for new ways of financing. Financing is extremely important. So, as I said, it's a collective effort. And to precisely answer your question, so it's three wishes. But the other thing is also what I would like to mention is I think we all need to talk. We all need to exchange views, and it's a collaborative effort. Collaboration is extremely important. We are all part of the solutions. The target is one. The methodologies are diverse. And we need to make sure that all of them are taken into consideration so that we get to the target, and that is extremely important. And the only way to do this is to talk together, to talk to each other, and to exchange views, and agree to disagree. It's fine, but exchanging is extremely important. That's the only way we're going to get there.
Thank you so much, Olivier, for having taken the time to be with us and share some insights from an industry perspective that I'm sure many people will be keen to learn more about. We hear a lot of scary things sometimes in the media, and I think it's important also just to get that perspective, and also to get more informed. And hopefully this conversation has helped some of you to get more informed, or at least to look further into this issue. So Olivier, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
That was Olivier de Matos, our third guest on the topic of the sustainable use of pesticides. I hope you enjoyed that, and also enjoyed the perspective from our two other guests on this issue. We need to try and have as broad a perspective as possible when it comes to policy. And we will be doing the same on the EU Chips Act and later on media freedom. So stay tuned, a lot coming up on Now More Questions.